Three Great Prophets by Louis Ginzberg. The reign of Uzziah, who for a little while occupied the throne during his father Amaziah's lifetime, is notable particularly because it marks the beginning of the activity of three of the prophets, Hosea, Amos, and Isaiah. The oldest of the three was Hosea, 20, the son of the prophet and Prince Beri, the Beri who later was carried away captive by Tiglath-Pileser, the king of Assyria. 21 of Beri's prophecies we have but two verses preserved for us by Isaiah. 22. The peculiar marriage contracted by Hosea at the command of God himself was not without a good reason. When God spoke to the prophet about the sins of Israel, expecting him to defend or excuse his people, Hosea said severely, "O Lord of the world, thine is the universe. In place of Israel choose another as thy peculiar people from among the nations of the earth." To make the true relation between God and Israel known to the prophet, he was commanded to take to wife a woman with a dubious past. After she had borne him several children, God suddenly put the question to him, "Why followest thou not the example of thy teacher Moses, who denied himself the joys of family life after his call to prophecy?" Hosea replied, "I can neither send my wife away nor divorce her, for she has borne me children. If now," said God to him, "thou who hast a wife of whose honesty thou art so uncertain that thou canst not even be sure that her children are thine, and yet thou canst not separate from her, how, then can I separate myself from Israel, from my children, the children of my elect Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob?" Hosea entreated God to pardon him, but God said, "Better were it that thou shouldst pray for the welfare of Israel, for thou art the cause that I issued three fateful decrees against them." Hosea prayed as he was bidden, and his prayer averted the impending threefold doom. 23. Hosea died at Babylon at a time in which a journey thence to Palestine was beset with many perils. Desirous of having his earthly remains rest in sacred ground, he requested before his death that his bier be loaded upon a camel, and the animal permitted to make its way as it would. Wherever it stopped, there his body was to be buried. As he commanded, so it was done. Without a single mishap, the camel arrived at safety. In the Jewish cemetery of the town it stood still, and there Hosea was buried in the presence of a large concourse. 24. The prophetical activity of Amos commenced after Hosea's had closed, and before Isaiah's began. Though he had an impediment in his speech. 25. He obeyed the call of God, and betook himself to Bethel to proclaim to the sinful inhabitants thereof the divine message with which he had been charged. The denunciation of the priest Amaziah, of Bethel, who informed against the prophet before King Jeroboam of Israel, did him no harm, for the king, idolater though he was, entertained profound respect for Amos. He said to himself, "God forbid I should think the prophet guilty of cherishing traitorous plans, and if he were, it would surely be at the bidding of God." 26. For this pious disposition Jeroboam was rewarded. Never had the northern kingdom attained to such power as under him. 27. However, the fearlessness of Amos finally caused his death. King Uzziah inflicted a mortal blow upon his forehead with a red-hot iron. 28. 2 years after Amos ceased to prophesy, Isaiah was favored with his first divine communication. It was the day on which King Uzziah, blinded by success and prosperity, arrogated to himself the privileges of the priesthood. He tried to offer sacrifices upon the altar, and when the high priest Azariah, 29, ventured to restrain him, he threatened to slay him and any priest sympathizing with him unless they kept silent. Suddenly the earth quaked so violently that a great breach was torn in the temple, through which a brilliant ray of sunlight pierced, falling upon the forehead of the king and causing leprosy to break forth upon him. Nor was that all the damage done by the earthquake. On the west side of Jerusalem, half of the mountain was split off and hurled to the east, into a road, at a distance of 4 stadia. 30 and not heaven and earth alone were outraged by Uzziah's atrocity and sought to annihilate him. Even the angels of fire, the seraphim, were on the point of descending and consuming him, when a voice from on high proclaimed that the punishment appointed for Uzziah was unlike that meted out to Korah and his company despite the similarity of their crimes. 31. When Isaiah beheld the august throne of God on this memorable day, 32, he was sorely affrighted, for he reproached himself with not having tried to turn the king away from his impious desire. 33, enthralled he hearkened to the hymns of praise sung by the angels, and lost in admiration he failed to join his voice with theirs. "Woe is me," he cried out, "that I was silent. Woe is me that I did not join the chorus of the angels praising God. Had I done it, I too, like the angels, would have become immortal, seeing I was permitted to look upon sights to behold which had brought death to other men." 34, then he began to excuse himself. I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of people of unclean lips. At once resounded the voice of God in rebuke. Of thyself thou art the master, and of thyself thou mayest say what thou choosest, but who gave thee the right to calumniate my children of Israel and call them a people of unclean lips? And Isaiah heard God bid one of the seraphim touch his lips with a live coal as a punishment for having slandered Israel. Though the coal was so hot that the seraph needed tongs to hold the tongs with which he had taken the coal from the altar, the prophet yet escaped unscathed. But he learned the lesson that it was his duty to defend Israel, not traduce him. Thenceforth, the championship of his people was the mainspring of the prophet's activity, and he was rewarded by having more revelations concerning Israel and the other nations vouchsafed him than any other prophet before or after him. Moreover, God designated Isaiah to be the prophet of consolation. Thus it happened that the very Isaiah whose early prophecies foretold the exile and the destruction of the temple, 35, later described and proclaimed, in plainer terms than any other prophet, 36, the brilliant destiny in store for Israel.